The afternoon rain fell like scattered buckshot against the weathered boards of Martha's saloon, each drop finding its own rhythm in the symphony of a dying day. Cedar Hollow sat quiet beneath the October sky, its single muddy street empty save for a few horses tied to posts, their heads lowered against the weather. The town had seen better days, back when the silver veins ran thick through the mountains. Now it was just another stop on the way to somewhere else. Inside the saloon, the air hung thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of whiskey. A handful of men nursed their drinks, speaking in low voices about cattle prices and the early frost that threatened the last of the harvest. In the far corner, away from the pot-belly stove and the card players, sat a man who'd become as much a fixture as the scarred oak bar itself. Levi Stone hadn't moved in 3 hours, his weathered hands wrapped around a glass of whiskey he'd barely touched, eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the grimy window. The other patrons had learned to give him his space. 3 years was long enough for a man's grief to become part of the landscape, something you worked around like a boulder in a field. Martha wiped down glasses behind the bar, her practiced movements betraying decades of the same routine. She'd seen all manner of men pass through her doors. Drifters, gamblers, broken souls looking for redemption at the bottom of a bottle. But Levi was different. He wasn't drinking to forget, he was drinking to remember. The door opened, not with the violent swing of a man seeking trouble or the tentative push of someone unsure of their welcome. 3 deliberate knocks preceded it, measured, purposeful. Then the door swung inward with quiet authority. The woman who entered seemed untouched by the rain. Her traveling cloak, a deep brown wool, showed no signs of the downpour that had been falling for the better part of an hour. She stood in the doorway for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the dim interior, and every man in the place turned to look. Women were rare enough in Cedar Hollow's saloon, but this one commanded attention in a way that had nothing to do with her gender. She was tall for a woman, with auburn hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet. Her face bore the kind of beauty that came from strength rather than softness. High cheekbones, a firm jaw, eyes the color of winter sage. She couldn't have been more than 30, but those eyes held stories. "Ma'am?" Martha called from behind the bar, her tone carefully neutral. "Can I help you?" The woman's gaze swept the room once more before settling on the corner where Levi sat. Something flickered across her features. Recognition, perhaps, or confirmation of something already known. "I just want to talk," she said, her voice carrying despite its softness. It was an educated voice, precise in its pronunciation, but with an underlying current of something raw. The card players exchanged glances. Tom Brennan, the town's self-appointed keeper of morals when it suited him, half rose from his chair. "This ain't no place for a lady, especially not in this weather. Johnson's boarding house is 2 doors down." She didn't spare him a glance. Her focus remained fixed on the corner, on the man who hadn't looked up since she'd entered. "I'm not looking for lodging. I said I want to talk." "Talk to who?" Brennan pressed, his hand moving unconsciously toward the pistol at his hip. Strangers asking questions in Cedar Hollow rarely brought anything good. This time she did turn, fixing him with a look that could have frozen the rain outside. "That's between me and the man I came to see." The tension in the room ratcheted up a notch. Martha's hand drifted below the bar where she kept a scattergun for the worst kind of trouble. The other patrons shifted in their seats, suddenly very interested in their drinks and cards. It was Levi who broke the standoff. He lifted his head slowly, like a man waking from a long dream. His eyes, gray as the storm clouds outside, met hers across the smoky distance. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, some wordless communication passing between them that excluded everyone else in the room. Then, with deliberate slowness, Levi reached out with one booted foot and pulled the chair opposite him away from the table. The scrape of wood on wood was loud in the sudden silence. The woman moved forward, her steps measured and sure despite the sawdust and spilled beer that made the floor treacherous. She walked like someone who'd covered many miles and expected to cover many more. When she reached Levi's table, she paused, one gloved hand resting lightly on the back of the offered chair. "Mr. Stone," she said, and it wasn't a question. He nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. "You've got the advantage of me, ma'am." "Perhaps," she agreed, then sat down with the kind of grace that suggested education and proper upbringing. Though I doubt that's true. Very little happens in this part of the territory that you don't know about. "Used to be that way," Levi said, his voice rough from disuse. "Haven't been paying much attention lately." 3 years is a long time to stop paying attention. The words hung between them like a challenge. Martha, still watchful behind the bar, saw Levi's jaw tighten. His hand moved toward his glass, then stopped. "You know me," he said. It wasn't a question either. "I know of you." The woman pulled off her gloves, one finger at a time, revealing hands that had seen work despite their elegant shape. "My name is June Lark." Something shifted in Levi's expression, not quite recognition, but a sharpening of focus, like a predator catching an unexpected scent. "Lark, from up near Sweetwater Creek." "My late husband's place," she confirmed, folding her gloves neatly and placing them on the table beside her. "Though I suppose it's not his anymore, is it? The dead don't hold property rights." The casual way she spoke of death made several of the eavesdropping patrons uncomfortable. In the West, death was common enough, but people didn't usually discuss it like the weather. Levi studied her for a long moment, then made a decision. He lifted his hand, catching Martha's eye. "Bring the lady a drink." "Water will be fine," June said without looking away from Levi's face. "Water it is," Martha replied, though her tone suggested she found the request as unusual as everything else about this encounter. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof with renewed vigor. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the valley like boulders tumbling down a mountainside. The saloon's interior grew darker, forcing Martha to light another kerosene lamp. "Why are you here?" Levi asked finally, the words seeming to cost him something. June was quiet for a moment, her sage-colored eyes studying him with an intensity that would have made a lesser man squirm. Levi simply waited, having learned long ago that patience was often the best defense. "They say you live near the crossing," she said eventually. "Near where the old bridge used to be?" Levi's stillness deepened. If such a thing were possible, he became like stone, his namesake more apparent than ever. "Used to. They say you were there the night it went down." "They say a lot of things." Martha arrived with the water, setting it down carefully between them. She lingered for a moment, clearly hoping for more of the story, but a look from Levi sent her back to the bar. June lifted the glass, took a small sip, then set it down with precise movements. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Mr. Stone, I'm not here for revenge or justice or any of the reasons you might expect." "Then why?" She met his gaze squarely, and for the first time since she'd entered, Levi saw something crack in her composure. Just a hairline fracture, but enough to reveal the pain beneath. "I want to understand," she said simply. "That's all, just to understand." The words settled over the table like dust after a stampede. Levi's hand moved to his whiskey glass, but instead of drinking, he pushed it aside. The gesture seemed to mean something to June. She relaxed fractionally, her shoulders dropping from their rigid line. "Understanding's a hard thing to come by out here," Levi said finally. "Harder still when it comes to things that can't be changed." "I'm not looking to change anything. The past is carved in stone." "Mr. Stone." A bitter smile touched her lips at the unintended wordplay. "I just need to know what happened that night, the truth of it, not the stories people tell." Levi was quiet for so long that the card players resumed their game. The soft slap of cards on felt providing a counterpoint to the rain. When he finally spoke, his voice was low enough that June had to lean forward to hear him. "Truth's a funny thing. Depends on where you're standing when you're looking at it. Then tell me where you were standing. He looked at her then. Really looked at her. And June had the uncomfortable sensation of being measured and weighed like gold dust on a scale. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, or at least convince him of something. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and pulled her chair closer. The scrape was loud in the relative quiet, drawing every eye in the place. June didn't flinch, didn't pull back, just waited as the distance between them shrank from feet to inches. How close did you mean to get, Mrs. Lark? Levi asked, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. She held his gaze, unflinching. Close enough to hear the truth when you speak it. Close enough that you can't hide behind whiskey and distance. That's dangerous territory for a widow woman. I've been in dangerous territory since the night my husband didn't come home. Mr. Stone, a little more won't kill me. Something that might have been respect flickered in Levi's eyes. He leaned back in his chair, creating space without actually moving away. You'll need more than water if you want to hear this story. I told you, I just want to talk. And I'm telling you, talking's thirsty work when it comes to the past. He signaled Martha again. Bring coffee, hot as you can make it. And some of that cornbread, if there's any left. Martha nodded, apparently satisfied that violence wasn't imminent. The tension in the saloon eased another degree, though the undercurrent of curiosity remained strong. June studied the man across from her while they waited. Levi Stone looked like a man carved from the landscape itself, weathered, solid, marked by elements and time. His hair, dark shot through with premature gray, hung past his collar. His clothes were clean but worn. Speaking of a man who took care of his possessions but didn't care for appearances. The hands resting on the table were scarred from rope and weather. Strong hands that had known work and, she suspected, violence when necessary. But it was his eyes that held her attention. Gray as winter sky, they held a depth of sadness that resonated with her own. Here was a man who understood loss, who'd been carved hollow by it and was still trying to figure out how to fill the empty spaces. The coffee arrived, along with cornbread that steamed when Martha set it down. The older woman gave June a look that might have been sympathy or warning before retreating once more. Eat, Levi said, pushing the plate toward her. Storm's getting worse. You'll need something warm in you before you head back out. June broke off a piece of cornbread, more to show willing than from hunger. I'm not going back out, not until we've talked. Could be a long night. I've had 3 years of long nights. Mr. Stone, one more won't matter. He almost smiled at that, just a slight softening around his mouth that suggested he remembered how, all right then, Mrs. Lark, you want to talk? We'll talk, but not here. He glanced around the saloon, at the barely concealed interest of their audience. Too many ears, too many mouths to spread tales come morning. Where then? Levi stood, moving with the easy grace of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than on foot. I've got a place. It's not much, but it's dry and private. That is, if you trust me enough to follow. June rose as well, gathering her gloves with steady hands. If you meant me harm, Mr. Stone, you've had 3 years to do it. I'll take my chances. This time he did smile, just a flash of what might have been humor or appreciation. Get your cloak then. Like I said, storm's getting worse. As June fastened her cloak and pulled up the hood, Levi tossed a few coins on the table. Martha nodded her thanks, then called out as they headed for the door. Levi. He paused, looking back. You be careful, she said, and her eyes flicked meaningfully to June. Always am, Martha. No, she said softly. You haven't been, not for a long time. Maybe it's time to start again. Levi didn't answer, just touched the brim of his hat and opened the door. The rain hit them like a physical force, cold and sharp with the promise of winter. June pulled her cloak tighter and followed him into the storm. leaving behind the warmth and whispered speculation of the saloon. Behind them, the door swung shut with a sound like finality, and the two figures disappeared into the gray curtain of rain, heading toward whatever reckoning awaited them in the gathering dark. The walk to Levi's place took them through the back streets of Cedar Hollow, past shuttered shops and darkened windows. The rain had driven everyone indoors, leaving the town feeling abandoned, like a stage after the actors had gone. June followed Levi's broad back, noting how he moved with purpose despite the treacherous footing, how he seemed to know every puddle and loose board without looking. His dwelling sat on the edge of town, where civilization gave way to wilderness. It was more than a shack, but less than a proper house, a single-room cabin with a lean-to addition and a small stable that looked newer than the rest. A thin stream of smoke rose from the chimney, quickly torn apart by the wind. Levi pushed open the door and gestured her inside. "It's not much," he said again, seeming suddenly conscious of his modest surroundings. June stepped past him into the warmth. The interior was sparse but clean. A bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove that radiated welcome heat. Books lined a rough shelf on one wall, their spines worn from handling. A rifle hung on pegs above the door, and a few cooking implements occupied another shelf. Everything was functional, nothing decorative save for a single photograph in a tarnished frame on the mantel. She didn't look at the photograph, not yet. "Sit," Levi said, moving to add wood to the stove. "I'll make fresh coffee." June removed her cloak, shaking the few drops of rain from its surface before hanging it on a peg near the door. She chose the chair facing the room rather than the wall, an old habit from years of teaching in rough frontier schools where keeping your back protected was simple wisdom. As Levi busied himself with the coffee pot, June studied him in the lamplight. The shadows emphasized the lines around his eyes, the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. This was a man who'd been broken and had chosen to stay that way, like a bone that healed wrong because no one thought to set it proper. "You said your name was June Lark," he said without turning around. "But that's not the name you were born with." It wasn't a question. June smiled slightly, appreciating his directness. "June Merriweather. I took my husband's name when we married, kept it after he died. It seemed important to honor something of his." "Samuel Lark." Levi set 2 cups on the table, then the coffee pot. "I knew him." Many people did. He was hard to miss. Big man, loud laugh, always had a story to tell at the trading post. Levi poured the coffee, the dark liquid steaming in the lamplight. "Good with horses?" "Yes," June said softly. "All of that." They sat in silence for a moment, the coffee warming their hands, the stove ticking as metal expanded. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, rain drumming steadily on the roof. "You want to know about that night?" Levi said finally. "I want to know the truth. People talk, Mr. Stone. They've been talking for 3 years. Some say it was an accident. Some say—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Some say other things." "What do you say?" June met his gaze directly. "I say I won't know until I hear it from someone who was there, and everyone says you were there." Levi nodded slowly. "I was there, but being somewhere and seeing everything clear are 2 different things." He took a sip of coffee, grimacing at the heat. "Why now? 3 years is a long time to wait for answers." "I wasn't ready before." June's fingers traced the rim of her cup. "Grief is strange. Mr. Stone, first you're drowning in it, can't breathe, can't think. Then you're angry, at God, at fate, at the one who left you behind. Then comes the numbness, and that's almost worse because at least pain means you're still alive." She looked up at him. "It's only recently I've been able to think about that night without wanting to scream or break things or just stop. And now I need to understand. Not for revenge or even for closure. I don't believe in closure. The dead don't come back just because we've made our peace. But I need to know what kind of man my husband was in his last moments. I need to know if the stories I've been telling myself are true. Levi studied her for a long moment. That's a dangerous thing to want. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves are kinder than truth. I'm a teacher, Mr. Stone, or was. I've spent my life dealing in facts and logic. I can't move forward built on a foundation of lies, even comfortable ones. What happened to the teaching? Hard to stand in front of children when you can barely stand yourself. I've been traveling since then, teaching letters and numbers to ranch families. Anyone who'll trade a meal and a dry place to sleep for learning. She smiled without humor. Turns out there's quite a demand for education when you're willing to go where the schools aren't. And this traveling brought you here. Eventually, I've been circling Cedar Hollow for months, like a hawk that can't quite decide whether to dive. Finally decided I'd been a coward long enough. Levi rose abruptly. Moving to the window, he stood there looking out at the rain, his reflection wavering in the glass. Your husband wasn't at the crossing by accident that night. June's stillness was absolute. Go on. There was a dispute. Nothing official. Nothing that would hold up in any court. But disputes out here don't usually make it to court anyway. He turned back to her. You know about the land boundaries, the water rights? Samuel never discussed business with me. No, I don't suppose he would have. Levi returned to the table but didn't sit. There were 3 ranches using that crossing. Water rights got complicated during the dry years. Your husband's land had the best access, upstream from the others. He could have dammed it, diverted it, controlled who got what. But he didn't. No, he didn't. Samuel Lark was many things, but he wasn't greedy. He believed in live and let live. Said there was enough for everyone if folks were reasonable. Levi's laugh was bitter. Reasonable's in short supply when cattle are dying of thirst. Someone wanted him to dam the water. Someone wanted to buy his land outright. When he wouldn't sell, they got creative. Started suggesting maybe he'd change his mind if things got difficult enough. June's hand tightened on her cup. Who? Does it matter now? It might. Levi shook his head. The man who wanted it most is dead himself now. Bart Morrison. Caught a fever 2 winters ago. Died raving about water that wasn't there. He finally sat down. But that night, Morrison was very much alive and getting desperate. The bank was calling in notes. He needed that water access or he'd lose everything. So he and Samuel met at the crossing. They did, but it wasn't supposed to be just the 2 of them. Levi's gray eyes were distant now, seeing something June couldn't. I was there as a witness. Morrison brought 2 of his men. Your husband came alone, said he didn't need protection to talk to a neighbor. That sounds like him. June murmured. Morrison made his offer one last time. When Samuel refused, things got heated. Words were exchanged. One of Morrison's men, fellow named Hutchins, got nervous and went for his gun. Levi paused, his jaw working. Your husband was faster. June blinked. Samuel with a gun. Surprised me too. Man moved like lightning. Had that iron out and aimed before Hutchins cleared leather. But he didn't shoot. Just held it there, steady as you please, and told everyone to calm down. Then what happened? Rain had been falling for days. Ground was soft. River was running high. The bridge was never meant to handle that kind of water. Levi's voice dropped. While everyone was focused on the guns, nobody noticed how the supports were shifting. Not until we heard the crack. The room seemed to contract around them, the lamplight flickering as if in sympathy with the memory. Samuel was standing closest to the edge. When the bridge started to go, he could have made it to solid ground. Would have, if he'd just thought of himself. Levi met June's eyes. But Hutchins had stepped out onto the bridge, trying to flank your husband. Man was so focused on his gun he didn't realize he was on bad wood. Understanding dawned in June's sage green eyes. Samuel tried to save him. Grabbed him and threw him toward safety. Hutchins made it. Your husband didn't. The words fell like stones into still water. Bridge took him down with it. By the time we got ropes and men to search, the river had taken him. Found his body 2 miles downstream the next morning. June sat perfectly still, absorbing this truth that was so different yet so similar to what she'd imagined. And Morrison tried to blame me for not maintaining the bridge proper, but there were too many witnesses. Hutchins himself told what really happened, how Samuel saved his life, couldn't live with the lie. I suppose, left the territory not long after. And you, Levi's smile was sharp as winter wind. I left too, in my way, abandoned the ranch, moved to town, been sitting in Martha's place ever since, trying to figure out how a good man dies saving someone who meant him harm. The same way he lived, June said quietly. By instinct, Samuel never could pass by someone in trouble, even if they'd caused the trouble themselves. They sat in companionable silence then, the storm outside seeming less violent now that the truth lay exposed between them. June found herself studying Levi's hands again, noting the way they cradled the coffee cup like something fragile. There's more, she said. It wasn't a question. There always is. Tell me. Levi stood again, restless as a caged wolf. I blamed myself. Still do. I was supposed to maintain that crossing, keep it safe. If I'd checked the supports that morning, maybe noticed the erosion. Or maybe the weight of 5 men and fear and drawn guns would have brought it down anyway. June's voice was gentle but firm. You can't carry the weight of every what if, Mr. Stone. Trust me, I've tried. Speaking from experience. 3 years' worth. She rose too, moving to stand beside him at the window. I've played that night over in my mind 1,000 different ways. What if I'd asked him not to go? What if I'd been stronger? Told him we could manage without Morrison's money? What if I'd been the kind of wife who knew about his business? Could have advised him better. He wouldn't have listened. No, June agreed. But that doesn't stop the wondering. She turned to face him. Just like you wondering about those bridge supports doesn't bring him back. Levi looked down at her, something shifting in his expression. Why are you really here, Mrs. Lark? It's not just for the story of that night. June considered her answer carefully. I told you I teach letters to ranch families. Last month I was at the Hendersons' place, up near Willow Creek. Mrs. Henderson mentioned she'd heard from her cousin in Cedar Hollow that Levi Stone was drinking himself to death in Martha's saloon, that he'd been there 3 years carrying guilt that wasn't his to carry. And you thought to save me! There was no mockery in it, just weary curiosity. I thought to see for myself. My husband died trying to save a man who meant him harm. Seemed fitting I should at least look in on the man who blames himself for not saving them both. I'm not looking for salvation, Mrs. Lark. Neither am I, Mr. Stone. But maybe understanding is enough. Maybe 2 people who know what it's like to carry guilt over things they couldn't control can find some peace in shared truth. Levi turned from the window, really looking at her for the first time since they'd left the saloon. What he saw seemed to surprise him, not pity or judgment, just a steady recognition from someone who'd walked similar dark paths. You planning to stay in Cedar Hollow? I hadn't planned anything beyond this conversation. There's a room at Johnson's boarding house. Like Brennan said, it's clean and Mrs. Johnson doesn't ask questions if you pay in advance. And after that, Levi moved back to the table, suddenly businesslike. Territories full of children needing letters, full of men and women who never learned to read their own names. Seems a waste for a teacher to stop teaching just because the world got hard. June followed him, noting how he wouldn't quite meet her eyes now. Are you offering me work, Mr. Stone? I'm offering you truth. Town could use a teacher. The children are growing up wild and ignorant. Their parents too proud to admit they need learning too, but might accept it if it was offered quiet-like. In the evenings, maybe. And where would this teacher live? Board at Johnson's gets expensive over time. There are empty cabins. Some need work, but they're solid enough. Person could make a life here, if they were so inclined. He finally looked at her. If they were done running from ghosts. June pulled her cloak from the peg, fastening it with steady hands. Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Stone, and for the truth. Where are you going? Storm's still fierce. To Johnson's. I think to pay in advance for a clean room where I can think about empty cabins and children who need teaching. She pulled up her hood. And men who've been sitting in saloons for 3 years when they should be living. She opened the door, letting in a swirl of rain and wind. But before stepping out, she turned back. I'll be at Martha's tomorrow evening. I hear the cornbread is worth a second visit. It is, Levi agreed. Coffee's terrible, though. Then maybe someone should bring their own. June smiled, and it transformed her face, showing the woman she'd been before grief carved new lines. Thank you, Mr. Stone, for the truth, all of it. She stepped into the storm before he could respond, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost herself. But unlike a ghost, she left traces, the scent of rain and lavender, the cooling cup of coffee, the sense that something long frozen had begun to thaw. Levi stood in his doorway, watching until even the idea of her had been swallowed by the night. Then he closed the door and turned back to his empty cabin, seeing it clearly for the first time in 3 years. On the mantel, his wife's photograph smiled at him with gentle understanding, as if she'd been waiting all this time for him to remember that the living had obligations to more than just the dead. He touched the frame gently, then set about cleaning up the coffee cups and straightening the already neat room. Tomorrow was coming whether he was ready or not, and for the first time in 3 years, that didn't seem like a threat. Outside, the storm began to break, and somewhere in Cedar Hollow's muddy streets, June Lark walked toward whatever came next, carrying truth like a lantern against the dark. The autumn market day in Cedar Hollow brought folks from miles around, turning the usually quiet town into a bustling hive of commerce and gossip. Wagons lined the main street, laden with the last harvest of squash and corn, preserved goods for the coming winter, and handmade wares from isolated homesteads. The air carried the scent of fresh bread, leather, and livestock, all mixed with the earthy smell of recent rain. June stood near the Henderson family's wagon, helping young Mary Henderson with her letters while her mother bartered preserves for winter cloth. The girl, no more than 8, traced each letter with fierce concentration, her tongue poking out slightly as she worked. Very good, Mary, June said softly. Remember, the L wants to rest its belly on the line. It had been a year since that stormy night in Martha's saloon, a year of slow changes, like water wearing away stone. June had taken the empty cabin at the edge of town, fixed it up with help from some of the ranching families grateful for her teaching. She'd started with the children. Then, gradually, their mothers began appearing at her door in the evenings, hungry for the education they'd been denied. Miss June? Mary tugged at her sleeve. Look, a whole word. June smiled at the wobbly cat on the slate. Perfect. Your mother will be so proud. She glanced up from the lesson and froze. Across the crowded market, she saw him. Levi Stone stood by the horse trader's pen, running his hand along a mare's flank with the practiced ease of a man who knew horse flesh. He wore cleaner clothes than that first night, his hair trimmed neat, though still long by town standards. The hollow look had left his face, replaced by something quieter but more present. Their eyes met across the distance. June felt the familiar flutter, the recognition that sparked between them whenever their paths crossed. It wasn't the first time since that night. They'd shared coffee at Martha's several times, conversations that ran deep like underground rivers, but always in the saloon, always with the safety of public space between them. He's looking at you again. Mrs. Henderson observed, returning with an armload of fabric. June turned back to Mary's slate. I don't know what you mean. Course you don't. The older woman's smile was knowing. Just like he doesn't know why he's been coming to town on market days regular-like, when he used to send his hired man. Mr. Stone has business in town. The horse auction. Ended an hour ago. Mrs. Henderson began packing up their goods. Yet there he stands, examining horses he's not buying, positioned just so he can see who's teaching my Mary her letters. Heat crept up June's neck. You're imagining things. Am I? Then why's he walking this way? June looked up sharply. Indeed. Levi was making his way through the crowd, his progress slow but determined. People stepped aside for him, some nodding greeting, others watching with the interest small towns reserved for potential gossip. Mrs. Henderson, he said when he reached them, touching his hat brim. Miss Mary. Mr. Stone, Mrs. Henderson replied, her smile widening. Fine day for the market. It is. His gray eyes found June's. Mrs. Lark. Mr. Stone. She was proud of how steady her voice sounded. Mary piped up. I can write cat now. Mr. Stone want to see. To June's surprise, Levi crouched down to the child's level, examining the slate with grave attention. That's fine work, Miss Mary. You'll be writing whole stories before long. The girl beamed. Miss June says I'm her fastest learner. I don't doubt it. He straightened, his movement bringing him closer to June. You have a good teacher. The air between them hummed with unspoken words. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat. Mary, help me load these preserves. Mind the glass jars. But Mama. Now, Mary. They moved away, leaving June and Levi standing in a bubble of awkward privacy amid the market's chaos. She busied herself with packing her teaching supplies, aware of his steady gaze. You're good with her, he said finally. She's eager to learn. Makes my job easier. June fastened her leather satchel. Did you buy anything at the auction? No, nothing caught my eye. He paused. That's not true. Everything I wanted was already spoken for. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes held a weight of meaning she wasn't ready to decipher. I should go, she said. I promised Mrs. Patterson I'd stop by this afternoon. Her eldest is struggling with arithmetic. I'll walk with you. That's not necessary. Maybe not. He fell into step beside her anyway. But I'd like to, if you'll allow it. They made their way through the market crowd, June acutely aware of the looks they drew. Widow Lark and Levi Stone, walking together in broad daylight. The gossip would be flying before they reached the end of the street. You don't mind the talk? She asked quietly. Do you? June considered. I used to. When I first came here, I wanted to be invisible. Just another traveling teacher. No past, no connections. She stepped around a puddle. But invisible is just another kind of running. And you're done running. I'm trying to be. She glanced at him. What about you? Levi was quiet for a moment. Been thinking about opening up the ranch again. It's been sitting idle too long. June's step faltered. The ranch near the crossing. Yes. His jaw tightened. Can't change what happened there, but maybe I can make something good from what's left. They'd reached the edge of the market, where the crowds thinned and the road stretched toward the residential section. June stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Why are you telling me this? Because you'd hear it anyway. Because... He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. Because I remember you standing at that crossing last spring. June's breath caught. She'd thought herself unobserved that day, when she'd finally gathered courage to visit the place where Samuel died. She'd stood on the new bridge stronger, safer, built with guilt and determination, and let herself cry for the first time in months. You were there, checking the supports. It's become a habit. He replaced his hat. You didn't see me. I thought about making myself known, but you seemed to need the solitude. I did. She resumed walking, slower now. It helped. Seeing it made it real in a way the stories hadn't. That's why I need to go back. Make it real. Make it mine again. Not just the place where... He stopped. Where my husband died saving a man who tried to harm him. June finished gently. Where you think you failed them both. Yes. They walked in silence for a while, the sounds of the market fading behind them. Finally, June spoke again. I saw you before. You know, before that night at Martha's. Levi's stride checked slightly. When? Last autumn's market, a year ago. She kept her eyes forward. I'd just arrived, was helping the millers with their stall. You were there with a load of hay. You looked, she searched for words, hollow, like a man going through motions without purpose. I asked Mr. Miller who you were. He told me about your wife, about the fever that took her. Said you'd been a different man since. She paused. I understood that kind of different. Is that why you came? Because you recognized a fellow ghost? June considered. Partly, but also because I was angry. Furious, really. At Samuel for dying. At God for letting it happen. At you for being there and not stopping it. She felt him tense beside her. I wanted someone to blame besides fate. And now I think we were both just people caught in a moment that changed everything. You couldn't save them any more than I could have stopped Samuel from being who he was. She managed a small smile. A man who'd save his enemy without thinking twice. They'd reached the Patterson house, a tidy frame building with roses climbing the porch posts. June stopped at the gate, one hand on the latch. I'm glad you're opening the ranch again, she said. The land shouldn't suffer for our sorrows. Will you come see it when I've made it habitable again? The question seemed to cost him something. I could use a woman's eye on the place, make sure it's fit for visitors. June studied his face, reading the careful hope there. Are you planning many visitors? Maybe. Depends on if I can convince a certain teacher that town life isn't the only option. Lots of ranch children need learning too. Could be a good situation for someone looking to make a real difference. Mr. Stone. Levi, he interrupted. I think we've moved past formalities, don't you? She took a breath. Levi, what are you asking? He met her gaze squarely. I'm asking if you'd consider it. Just consider. The ranch house is big, bigger than one man needs. There's a whole wing could be set up for teaching. Families could bring their children, stay for lessons, like a proper school, but for folks who can't get to town regular. He paused. You'd have your own space, of course, your own life. I'm not suggesting. I wouldn't presume. I know what you're not suggesting, June said softly. And I know what you are. Do you? A chance, for both of us, to build something new without forgetting what was. Yes, the simple word carried weight. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her window, peering out with undisguised curiosity. June sighed. I need to go. Emma Patterson won't learn arithmetic if I stand here all afternoon. Will you think about it? June looked at him, this man who'd been broken and was slowly mending, whose grief matched her own in depth if not in detail. I've been thinking about it since you pulled that chair closer a year ago. Something sparked in his gray eyes. And I'll come see the ranch, when you're ready. She opened the gate. But Levi, make sure you're making it habitable for yourself first. A home needs to shelter the living, not shrine the dead. He nodded slowly. Wise words from a teacher. Hard-won words from a widow. She stepped through the gate. Good afternoon, Mr. Stone. Good afternoon, Mrs. Lark. She felt his eyes on her as she climbed the porch steps. At the door, she turned back. He still stood by the gate, hat in hand, looking more alive than she'd ever seen him. Saturday, she called. I'll be at Martha's on Saturday evening. The coffee's still terrible. I'll bring my own, he called back, and his smile transformed his weathered face. Maybe something stronger, if you're willing. We'll see, she said, and went inside. carrying that smile with her like a warm ember against the coming winter. Outside, Levi stood a moment longer, then settled his hat and headed back toward the market. He had supplies to buy, plans to make, a ranch to bring back to life. The ghost of Samuel Lark no longer haunted his steps. Instead, he felt accompanied by something like blessing, as if the man who died saving his enemy might approve of this slow resurrection. In the Patterson parlor, June helped Emma with her sums, but her mind kept drifting to gray eyes and careful hope, to the possibility of a teaching room in a ranch house, to the way grief might transform into something else when shared between two people who understood its weight. Outside, the autumn sun slanted gold across Cedar Hollow, and somewhere between the market and the memory, two lives that had stopped were beginning again, careful and slow as spring after a hard winter. Saturday evening found Martha's saloon quieter than usual. The regular crowd thinned by a barn dance at the Morrison place ironic, considering the role that family had played in the tragedy that brought June and Levi together. Only a few dedicated drinkers remained, leaving plenty of space for private conversation. June arrived first, choosing the same corner table where she'd first seen Levi over a year ago. Martha brought her coffee without being asked, the older woman's knowing smile suggesting she'd been expecting this. "He'll be along," Martha said, setting down the cup. "Man's been pacing outside for 10 minutes, working up his nerve." "He has nothing to be nervous about," June replied, though her own hands trembled slightly as she lifted the coffee. "Doesn't he?" Martha's eyes were kind but shrewd. "Sometimes the scariest conversations are the ones we want most to have." Before June could respond, the door opened. Levi entered, carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle and looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. He'd dressed with care-clean shirt, vest properly buttoned, boots polished to a shine that spoke of effort rather than vanity. He crossed to her table with determined steps, as if afraid hesitation might rob him of courage. "Mrs. Lark." "Mr. Stone," she gestured to the chair across from her. "Though I thought we'd agreed on less formality." "Right." He sat, placing the bundle carefully on the table. "June." "Better," she smiled, trying to ease the tension. "What did you bring?" He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a bottle of good whiskey and a smaller flask. "Coffee improvement," he said, "and something that might make the telling easier." "The telling? You wanted to know about that night? The whole truth of it?" He poured a measure of whiskey into 2 glasses Martha had materialized with, then added coffee from June's pot. "There are parts I haven't told anyone, parts that might change how you see things." June accepted the doctored coffee, the whiskey's warmth spreading through her chest. "I'm listening." Levi stared into his own cup for a long moment, gathering words like a man gathering scattered cards. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of long-held secrets. The rain had been falling for 5 days straight, not the usual autumn drizzle, but real rain, the kind that turns creeks into rivers and rivers into monsters. He took a sip, grimacing not at the taste but at memory. "I'd checked the bridge that morning, like I said, but I was distracted." "By what?" "By knowing what Morrison was planning." He met her eyes. "I knew about the meeting. Morrison had approached me 2 days before, wanting me to support his claim to the water rights. Said if I backed him, confirmed that your husband had agreed to limit his usage, he'd make it worth my while." June felt something cold settle in her stomach. But Samuel would never have agreed to that. No, he wouldn't have. That's why Morrison wanted me to lie. Levi's jaw tightened. When I refused, he said things would go hard for anyone who stood against him. Said accidents happened all the time in ranch country. He threatened you. Not just me. Levi poured more whiskey, this time straight. I had a hand working for me then. Young fellow named Tommy Brennan, Tom's kid brother. Good with horses, terrible with everything else, but eager to learn. Morrison made sure I knew that Tommy's safety depended on my cooperation. Understanding dawned. So you went to the meeting to protect him? I went to try to keep the peace. Thought maybe I could talk sense into Morrison, or at least keep things from escalating. His laugh was bitter. 40 years old and still naive enough to think reasonable men could solve things with words. Samuel thought the same thing, June said softly. He did. Showed up alone, just like I told you. But what I didn't tell you was that I'd warned him. Sent Tommy to your place that afternoon with a message, telling Samuel to bring men, to be careful. Levi's hands clenched around his glass. Tommy never made it. What happened? Morrison's men intercepted him. Didn't hurt him bad. Just scared him enough to send him running back to town. By the time I realized the message hadn't gotten through, it was too late. He drained his glass. Your husband walked into that meeting blind because I failed to protect a boy too green to protect himself. June reached across the table, her fingers barely brushing his clenched fist. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? He turned his hand palm up, catching her fingers in a grip gentle despite its desperation. If I'd ridden to warn Samuel myself, if I'd stood up to Morrison from the start, if Samuel had been a different man, he wouldn't have gone at all. June interrupted. But he wasn't, and you knew that. Just like you knew you couldn't abandon that boy to Morrison's mercy. They sat in silence, hands linked across the scarred wood, while the saloon's few patrons carefully ignored them. Finally, Levi continued his story. When we got to the crossing, the river was running high and angry. You could hear it before you saw it, like thunder that never stopped. He squeezed her hand once, then let go. The bridge was shaking, but it had shaken before in high water. I checked the main supports, they looked solid enough in the dark. In the dark. Morrison insisted on meeting after sunset. Said he didn't want the whole valley knowing his business. Levi's smile was humorless. Should have known then it would go bad. Honest dealings don't need darkness. But you stayed. I stayed. Watched Morrison make his offer. Watched your Samuel refuse it polite as Sunday dinner. Even when Hutchins went for his gun. Samuel kept his calm. Levi's eyes went distant. I've seen plenty of men handle firearms. Most shake, even experienced ones. When death's on the table, your husband's hand was steady as stone. He never told me he could shoot like that, June murmured. Man like Samuel Lark didn't advertise his capabilities. But I'd bet my ranch he'd seen trouble before. Learned to handle it without fanfare. Levi poured another measure of whiskey. When the bridge started to go, time went strange. You know how folks say everything slows down in a crisis? It's true, but it's also false. Your mind speeds up so fast that the world seems to crawl, but your body's still stuck in real time. June nodded. She remembered that sensation from the night she'd gotten word of Samuel's death, how the world had crystallized into perfect, terrible clarity while her limbs moved like they were trapped in molasses. I saw the timber crack, Levi continued. Saw Hutchins out there on bad wood, still focused on his fool gun. Saw your Samuel see it too. Our eyes met for just a second, and I knew what he was going to do. His voice dropped. I tried to stop him, started forward, shouting something don't remember what, but Samuel was already moving. Tell me, June whispered. All of it. He could have made it to safety easy. 3 steps, maybe 4, and he'd have been on solid ground. Instead, he lunged for Hutchins, grabbed the man's coat, and threw him like a sack of grain toward the bank. Hutchins landed hard but safe, and Samuel. The bridge took him. The whole center section went at once. He tried to jump, got one hand on a support beam that was still attached. For a moment, I thought, Levi's voice cracked. I had hold of a rope, was moving to throw it, but the current, the debris, a whole tree came down the river like God's own battering ram, hit the remaining supports. June closed her eyes, seeing it too clearly. He didn't have a chance. He had several chances. He spent them all on saving a man who'd drawn a gun on him. Levi's fist hit the table, making the glasses jump. That's what I can't forgive. Not Morrison for his greed, not Hutchins for his stupidity. Not the river for its hunger, but your Samuel for being so damn noble he threw away his life for someone who didn't deserve it. And yourself. June opened her eyes, studying his tortured face. What can't you forgive yourself for? For surviving? For standing there with a rope in my hand and watching a good man die? For not being fast enough, strong enough, good enough to save him? The words poured out like water through a broken dam. For coming home that night to my empty house and feeling grateful it wasn't me, even while knowing a woman was about to get news that would break her world in half. June stood abruptly, moving around the table. Levy looked up at her, confused, as she settled into the chair beside him instead of across, close enough to touch, close enough that he couldn't hide behind distance and whiskey. "Listen to me," she said, her voice low but fierce. "You want forgiveness, I'll give it to you. Not because you need it, you don't. You didn't kill Samuel. The river did that, and choices did that. And maybe God did that for reasons we'll never understand. But if carrying my forgiveness helps you put down some of that weight, then have it. I forgive you for surviving. I forgive you for being human. I forgive you for not being able to change who Samuel was in that moment." Levi's breathing had gone ragged. "June." "I'm not finished." She caught his face between her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "But I won't forgive you if you keep punishing yourself for breathing when he's not. Samuel died the way he lived, protecting others. That was his choice, his nature. Honor that by living, not by crawling into a bottle and pretending you died too." They stayed frozen like that for a long moment. June's hands gentle but firm on his weathered cheeks. Levi's gray eyes swimming with 3 years of unshed tears. Then something broke in him, like ice giving way to spring flood. He didn't cry men like Levi Stone had forgotten how, but he sagged forward, his forehead coming to rest against June's shoulder. She held him, this man who'd carried too much for too long, and felt her own grief shift and settle into something bearable. They breathed together, two people who'd been drowning separately, finally finding air. When Levi finally straightened, his eyes were clearer than she'd ever seen them. "There's more," he said quietly. "About after—" "Tell me." "Morrison tried to claim the water rights anyway. Said Samuel had agreed verbally, that I'd witnessed it. When I told the truth instead, he came after me hard, tried to buy my ranch out from under me, turned the bank against me, spread stories about how I'd been negligent with the bridge maintenance. But people knew better. Some did. Martha stood by me, and a few others. But mudsticks, even when it's lies. By the time Morrison died and his son scattered the holdings, I was near broken anyway. My wife had passed the year before. Ranch was too much for one man to manage. And he shrugged. I gave up, moved to town and tried to find the bottom of every bottle in Martha's stock." June poured coffee into his empty glass, adding just a touch of whiskey. "But you didn't find it." "Not for lack of trying." He accepted the cup gratefully. "Martha started watering down my drinks after the first year. Don't think I didn't notice, but it seemed too much effort to protest. And now," Levi looked at her with something like wonder, "now I've got a ranch to rebuild and a reason to do it. If you're willing to help. As a teacher, as whatever you're willing to be." He caught her hand, cradling it like something precious. "I'm not asking for promises. I know it's too soon, too complicated, but I'm asking for a chance to prove that something good can grow from all this sorrow." June studied their joined hands, his scarred and strong, hers ink-stained but steady. "Samuel would have liked you," she said finally. "He had a gift for seeing past the surface of people. He would have seen what I see." "What's that?" "A good man who's been lost but is finding his way back. Someone worth taking a chance on." She squeezed his fingers. "Show me this ranch of yours. Levi Stone. Let's see what we can build." For the first time in 3 years, Levi smiled without shadows. "When?" "Tomorrow's Sunday. Seems fitting to look at new beginnings on a Lord's Day." "I'll come for you after church." "I'll be ready." They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, the weight of truth spoken and received settling between them like a blessing. Outside, stars began to appear in the clear autumn sky, and Cedar Hollow prepared for sleep. But in Martha's saloon, two people who'd been sleeping for years were finally, carefully, waking up. Sunday dawned clear and cold, the first real bite of winter riding the morning breeze. June dressed carefully in her best day dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the green in her eyes, then chided herself for vanity. This was a practical visit to discuss a possible teaching arrangement. Nothing more. But her hands still trembled as she pinned up her hair. The church service passed in a blur of hymns and sermon. Reverend Douglas spoke about rebuilding after storms, about the patience required to lay new foundations on ground that had been shaken. June found herself stealing glances at Levi, who sat 3 pews back on the men's side. His attention fixed forward, but his awareness of her obvious in the careful stillness of his posture. After the service, the congregation spilled out into the churchyard, clustering in small groups to exchange gossip and plans for the week ahead. June was immediately cornered by Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Henderson. "Heard you're taking lunch at the Stone Ranch today," Mrs. Patterson said, her eyes bright with curiosity. June kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Stone has kindly offered to show me the property. He's considering setting up a proper schoolroom for the ranch families who can't make it to town regularly." "Is that what he's considering?" Mrs. Henderson's smile was knowing. "Martha says you two have been taking coffee together regular-like." "Martha says too much," June replied mildly, but she felt heat rising in her cheeks. Now, Mrs. Patterson patted her arm. "Nothing wrong with two lonely people finding comfort in conversation. Lord knows you've both carried your grief long enough." Before June could respond, she caught sight of Levi leading a buckboard around from the church's stable yard. He'd cleaned the wagon thoroughly, she noted, and laid a thick blanket over the seat. Such small considerations shouldn't have made her heart flutter, but they did. "Ladies," he said, touching his hat brim as he drew up beside them. "Mrs. Lark, if you're ready." "Of course." She accepted his hand up into the wagon, aware of the watching eyes and knowing smiles. Let them talk, she thought. They would anyway. The ride out to the ranch took them through country June had avoided for 3 years. As they approached the river crossing, she felt Levi tense beside her. "We can go around," he offered. "Take the north road. It's longer, but—" "No." June straightened her spine. "I won't spend my life avoiding a bridge." The new bridge was broader than the old one, built with thick timbers and iron reinforcements. Someone, Levi, she suspected, had been maintaining it meticulously. The planks showed no wear. The supports were clearly checked regularly, and iron rings had been added every few feet along the rails. "Safety ropes," Levi explained, seeing her notice them. "In case anyone falls, they can grab hold, pull themselves up." They crossed in silence, the river below running calm and ordinary, giving no sign of its past violence. On the other side, June released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "It's just a bridge," she said softly. "Yes," Levi agreed. "Took me a while to remember that." The ranch house came into view as they crested a low hill. June had expected neglect, but while the property showed signs of reduced activity, the main buildings were sound. The house itself was larger than she'd imagined, 2 stories with a wraparound porch and real glass windows that caught the morning sun. "It's beautiful," she said, surprised into honesty. It was. Levi pulled up in front of the main entrance. "My Margaret loved this place, put her whole heart into making it a home. After she died, I let things slide some, but the bones are good." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Come on, I'll show you inside." The front door opened into a wide hallway with rooms branching off on either side. Dust cloths covered most of the furniture, and the air held that peculiar stillness of spaces long unoccupied. But June could see what it had been: warm woods, good craftsmanship, touches of beauty in the carved stair rail and colored glass transom windows. "The kitchen's through here," Levi said, leading her down the hall. "Still functional, though I've been taking most of my meals with the hands in the bunkhouse." The kitchen was enormous by frontier standards, with a proper stove, good cupboards, and a table big enough to seat 10. Windows looked out over a garden gone wild but still showing signs of its original planning. "Margaret's herb garden," Levi explained, following her gaze. "I've kept it watered, but I don't know enough about plants to do more than that." "It could be brought back," June said, seeing potential in the tangled growth. "Most herbs are hardy. They want to survive. Like people," Levi said quietly. She turned to find him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Yes," she agreed. "Like people." He cleared his throat, gesturing toward a door on the far side of the kitchen. "Let me show you the wing I was thinking of for the school." The east wing of the house had clearly been intended for a large family that never materialized. 3 good-sized rooms sat empty, connected by a smaller hallway with its own entrance from the side porch. "This could be the main classroom," Levi said, opening the first door. "Good light from the windows, close to the necessary out back. The other rooms could be for different age groups, or one could be a library if we could get books." "We?" June asked softly. He colored slightly. "That is, if you decided to take on the project. I didn't mean to presume." "I like the sound of 'we,'" she interrupted. "And I have books. Not many, but enough to start. The Territorial Education Board might provide more if we could prove we're serving enough children." They moved through the rooms, June already envisioning desks here, a map there, shelves for slates and primers. The space felt right, like it had been waiting for purpose. How many families would send their children? "I've talked to a few. The Carters have 4 youngsters. The Millers 3. The Rodriguez family from the South Valley has 6, though the older boys might be too busy with ranch work, all told. Could be 15, maybe 20 students if word spreads." "That's a good start." June ran her hand along a windowsill, finding it solid despite years of neglect. "What about evening classes for adults?" "You do that." "Literacy isn't just for children. I've been teaching women in town, but I know there are men too proud to admit they can't read. Maybe here, away from town gossip, they'd be willing to learn." Levi moved closer, his presence warm at her back. "You're already planning it. In your mind. You're already here." June turned to face him, finding herself trapped between his solid warmth and the windowsill. "Am I wrong to be—" "No." His hand came up to cup her cheek, work-roughened thumb gentle against her skin. "I just want to be sure you understand what I'm offering, and what I'm not." "Tell me." "I'm offering you a place to teach, a home if you want it, your own space, your own life. I won't push for more than you're willing to give." His gray eyes were serious. "But I won't pretend I don't hope for more. Someday, when you're ready, if you're ever ready." June leaned into his touch. "And if I'm never ready, if all I can offer is friendship and shared work, then I'll count myself lucky to have that much." His hand dropped, but he didn't step back. "I've learned not to take whatever peace I find for granted." They stood there in the empty room, afternoon sun slanting through windows that needed washing, possibility hanging between them like dust motes in the light. Finally, June stepped sideways, needing space to think clearly. "Show me the rest," she said. "Then feed me that lunch you promised. I think better on a full stomach." His smile was answer enough. The meal was simple cold beef, fresh bread from town, preserves that might have been Margaret's last batch. They ate in the kitchen, windows open to let in the crisp air, and talked about practical things. How many desks they'd need, whether the Territorial Board would recognize a ranch school, which families might contribute supplies or labor. I could board here during the week, June said, thinking aloud. Keep my place in town for weekends. That way parents would know there's always someone here if they need to leave a child longer, and I wouldn't be— She paused, searching for words. Compromised, Levi suggested gently. June, we'd do this proper. I'd hire you official-like, with a contract and wages. Maybe bring in a widow woman as housekeeper and chaperone if needed. Your reputation matters to me. I know. She reached across the table to touch his hand. You're a good man. Levi Stone. I'm trying to be— He turned his palm up, threading their fingers together. For you. For myself. For whatever comes next. They finished the meal in comfortable silence, hands linked across the worn wood. Outside, clouds began gathering on the horizon, promising more rain. But inside the kitchen was warm and full of possibility. I need a week, June said finally, to settle things in town, pack my books and teaching supplies, to be sure this is right. Take all the time you need. A week, she repeated firmly. I've spent 3 years being unsure of everything. I'm ready to choose something and move forward. Levi squeezed her fingers. And you choose this despite everything? Because of everything, June corrected. We can't change what happened at that bridge, but maybe we can build something good on the other side of it. He stood, drawing her up with him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Two people who'd lost everything and were carefully, tentatively, finding their way towards something new. I'll take you back to town, he said finally. But June, this kitchen's going to feel mighty empty without you in it. Just for a week, she promised. Then we'll see about filling it up again, with students and laughter and maybe even some of those herbs from Margaret's garden. She would have liked that, Levi said softly. Would have liked you. June smiled, feeling the truth of it. Somewhere in this house. Two ghosts were nodding approval, a woman who'd loved this place and wanted it filled with life, and a man who'd died believing in second chances and the possibility of grace. As they rode back to town through the gathering dusk, June allowed herself to imagine it mornings full of children's voices, evenings grading papers by lamplight, seasons turning while she and Levi built something careful and strong and new, not a replacement for what they'd lost, but a testament to the courage of continuing on. The bridge, when they crossed it again, was just a bridge. And that, June thought, was its own kind of miracle. The first night at the ranch arrived faster than June had anticipated. A week of preparations, packing books, settling accounts in town. Weathering the storm of gossip and well-meaning advice had passed in a blur. Now, as October's early darkness settled over the valley, she stood in the doorway of what would be her quarters, a small but comfortable room adjacent to the planned schoolroom. Levi had been true to his word. He'd hired Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, a widow from the South Valley, as housekeeper and chaperone. Elena was a practical woman who'd raised 7 children and buried a husband, and she looked at June with knowing eyes that held no judgment. Senor Stone, he is a good man, Elena had said simply while helping June unpack. Lost, for a long time, but good. You understand. June understood perfectly. Now, with her few possessions arranged and the house settling into evening quiet, she felt the magnitude of her choice. Through her window, she could see light spilling from the barn where Levi was tending to the horses. He'd kept his distance since her arrival that morning, present for necessary discussions, but careful not to presume intimacy. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. June, Elena's voice carried warmly. Supper is ready. Senor Stone. He waits. The kitchen felt different with people in it. Elena had worked some kind of magic, filling the space with a sense of cornbread and stew, bringing life to what had been a monument to absence. Levi sat at the table's head, looking uncomfortable with the formality, until June deliberately chose the seat beside rather than across from him. Smells wonderful, Elena, June said, accepting a bowl of the hearty stew. Is nothing special, But men, they forget to eat proper when left alone. Elena shot Levi a maternal look that made him duck his head like a scolded boy. They ate quietly at first, the newness of the arrangement creating careful boundaries. But gradually, discussion of the next day's plans eased the tension. The Carter children would arrive first, Levi reported, their father eager to have them learning while the fall work was lighter. Young Tom Carter's bright, Levi said, taught himself to figure by counting cattle. He'll take to proper arithmetic quick. And his sisters? Sarah's 12, old enough to help with the young ones. Emma's 8, quiet but watches everything. The baby, Louise, she's only 5, might be too young. No child is too young to start learning. June interrupted gently. Even if she just listens to the others recite, she'll absorb more than you think. Elena nodded approvingly. My youngest. He learned his letters sitting under the table while I taught his brothers. Children, they are like sponges. After supper, Elena retired to her own room, formerly a storage area that Levi had converted with typical thoroughness. June found herself alone with him, the kitchen lamp casting a warm circle of light that seemed to hold back the vast darkness beyond. Walk with me, Levi asked. I want to show you something. She fetched her shawl and followed him out into the crisp night. Stars blazed overhead, unmarred by clouds, and the air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. He led her not to the barn or the corrals, but to a small rise behind the house. Margaret's spot, he said quietly. She used to come here when she needed to think. A simple bench sat beneath an old cottonwood, positioned to overlook the valley. In daylight, June imagined, the view would stretch for miles. Now, in darkness, scattered lights from distant ranches sparkled like earthbound stars. They sat together, not quite touching, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. Are you frightened? Levi asked suddenly. Of what? This, starting over, being here where, he gestured vaguely toward the river, where so much has happened. June considered her answer. I was frightened in town, frightened of staying still, of becoming one of those widows who stops living but doesn't quite die. Here, she pulled her shawl closer. Here I feel purposeful, nervous, yes, but not frightened. I've been frightened for 3 years, Levi admitted. Frightened of feeling anything beyond grief. Frightened of dishonoring Margaret's memory by wanting to live again. Frightened of that bridge and what it took from both of us. And now, he turned to look at her, his face a study of shadows and starlight. Now I'm frightened of different things. Of not being enough, of asking too much, of ruining this fragile thing we're building. June reached for his hand, finding it cold in the night air. Then we'll be frightened together. That seems less lonely than being frightened apart. His fingers tightened around hers. June, I need you to know I don't expect anything. Having you here, helping with the school, sharing meals, that's more than I dared hope for. I know. She shifted closer, drawn by his warmth. But Levi, maybe it's time we both stopped living by what we don't expect and started considering what we might actually want. What do you want? The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. June thought of her empty room in town, of the years stretching behind and ahead, of the way light looked different when you had someone to share it with. Right now, I want to sit here with you and not think about tomorrow or yesterday. Just be here, on this bench your Margaret loved, and know that it's all right to be alive. She would have liked you, Levi said, echoing his earlier words. Would have pushed me to court you proper, flowers and Sunday dinners and all. Maybe that's what we're doing, June suggested. Just in our own way, at our own pace. They sat quietly then, hands linked, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, answered by another. The ordinary sounds of night seemed blessed by their simplicity. When the cold finally drove them inside, they found Elena had left coffee on the stove and the fire banked for the night. The kitchen felt like a sanctuary, warm and welcoming after the sharp air outside. I should say good night, June said, though she made no move to leave. You should, Levi agreed, equally still. They stood there, caught between propriety and desire, until June made the choice. She rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek, quick and light as a butterfly landing. Good night, Levi. Thank you for sharing Margaret's bench with me. She was at the door before he found his voice. June! She paused, not turning. Yes. The fire needs tending in the mornings. Before Elena wakes, I usually do it around 5, the kitchen's warmest by the stove. It was an invitation and a question wrapped in practical words. June smiled. I've always been an early riser. Coffee tastes better when shared. That it does, he agreed softly. In her room, June unpacked her nightgown and brushed out her hair, movements automatic while her mind replayed the evening. Through the thin walls, she could hear Levi moving about, the ordinary sounds of a house preparing for sleep. How strange and wonderful to hear life beyond her own breathing. She'd just blown out her lamp when she heard it, the soft scrape of Levi's chair on the porch, the quiet ritual of his last pipe before bed. Without thinking, she moved to the window, peering out through the curtains. He sat facing the valley, shoulders relaxed in a way she'd never seen in town. The tobacco smoke rose straight in the still air, and though she couldn't see his face, something in his posture suggested peace. A floorboard creaked behind her. Is good to see. Elena's voice came softly. For too long, he sits out there like he waits for ghosts. Tonight, he just sits. June turned to find the older woman in her doorway, wrapped in a worn robe. I didn't mean to spy. Is not spying to care about someone's heart. Elena moved into the room, her face kind in the darkness. You worry what people say about you being here. A little. June admitted. Let them talk. They talked when my Miguel died. Said I should marry quick or starve. Instead, I work. I raise my children. I choose my own way. She patted June's arm. You and Senor Stone, you understand loss. That makes you careful with joy. It's good to be careful, but not too careful. See. After Elena left, June returned to her bed, but sleep was elusive. Every sound was new, the house settling. Wind in the cottonwoods, the distant bark of a dog, and underneath it all, the awareness that Levi was near, separated by walls but joined by something harder to define. When she finally dozed, she dreamed not of bridges or rivers, but of kitchens filled with lamplight and children's voices, of shared coffee in the pre-dawn dark, of a bench beneath stars where two people learned to stop being frightened alone. She woke before 5, dressed quickly in the cold room, and made her way to the kitchen. True to his word, Levi was there, coaxing the fire to life. He looked up at her entrance, and his smile was worth the early hour. Coffee, he asked. Always, she replied, and took her place beside him at the stove. They worked in companionable silence, the simple domesticity of the moment more intimate than any words. When the coffee was ready, they sat at the table, cups warming their hands, and watched through the window as the sky began its slow brightening. The Carters will be here by 7, Levi said eventually. I'm ready. June took a sip, finding the coffee strong and perfect. Nervous, but ready. You'll be wonderful. Those children don't know how lucky they are. Neither do we, June said softly. To have found this, each other. A reason to stop simply existing and start living again. Levi reached across the table, palm up in invitation. She placed her hand in his, and they sat that way as the kitchen filled with dawn light. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the best way to honor the dead was to choose, carefully and deliberately, to be among the living. Outside, the day broke clear and bright, full of promise and the sound of approaching wagon wheels. The first children were coming, and with them, the future that June and Levi were brave enough to build together. The rhythm of days at the ranch settled into something both new and timeless. November arrived with frost on the windows and breath that clouded in the morning air. But inside the schoolroom, warmth bloomed from more than just the pot-bellied stove Levi had installed. 2 weeks had passed since June's arrival, and already the space hummed with life. 15 children now filled the benches each morning, their voices rising in unison as they recited multiplication tables or sounded out words from McGuffey's reader. The walls bore maps June had drawn herself and samples of the children's best penmanship, each small achievement displayed with pride. It was during these ordinary days that June and Levi learned to exist in the same space without questions or promises. They moved around each other with the careful grace of dancers learning new steps, neither pushing nor pulling, simply being. "Miss June," Sarah Carter called from her seat by the window. "Mister, Stone's fixing the fence again. That's the 3rd time this week." June glanced outside to where Levi worked on the corral fence, his movements deliberate and sure. She'd noticed his increased attention to repairs lately, especially to things that had functioned well enough before. "Perhaps he wants everything perfect for the winter," June suggested, turning back to the slate where she'd been demonstrating the long division. "Or perhaps he likes working where he can see the schoolroom," Emma Carter whispered to her sister, earning a sharp look from June that didn't quite hide her blush. The children had taken to watching June and Levi with a fascinated attention usually reserved for barn cats stalking mice. Every shared meal, every evening walk, every morning coffee became subject to their innocent scrutiny. "Back to your arithmetic," June said firmly. "Tom, please help Louise with her numbers while I check the older students' work." The morning progressed smoothly until the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. Through the window, June saw 3 riders approaching ranchers from the valley, their faces set in expressions that meant business. Levi met them in the yard, and though June couldn't hear the words, she recognized the tension in his stance. After a few minutes, he glanced toward the schoolroom, then led the men to the barn. "Continue your work," June instructed, though her own concentration was fractured. "Sarah, please lead the younger children in their alphabet practice." An hour later, Levi appeared in the schoolroom doorway. His expression was carefully neutral, but June had learned to read the tightness around his eyes. "Mrs. Lark, might I speak with you? Elena can watch the children for a moment." June followed him onto the porch, where the cold air bit at her cheeks. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Exactly." He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was choosing his words carefully. "Those men were from the Cattlemen's Association. They're pressuring the smaller ranchers again about water rights." "But I thought that was settled after—" She stopped, not wanting to invoke Samuel's name carelessly. "So did I. But Morrison's son James has returned from back east. Seems he's got ideas about reclaiming what he sees as his father's legacy." Levi's jaw tightened. "He's buying up notes, calling in debts, already forced 2 families off their land." "Can he do that?" "If you've got enough money and the right lawyers, you can do most anything." He looked out over the valley. "They wanted to know where I stood, whether I'd back the association's plan to control water access centrally. And I told them I stood where I've always stood for fair use and neighbor helping neighbor." His smile was grim. "They didn't much like that answer." June touched his arm. "You're worried." "Morrison's boy has been asking about that night, about the bridge, about the witnesses." Levi met her eyes. "About you." A chill ran through June that had nothing to do with the November air. "What could he want with me? Leverage, maybe, or just to stir up old pain." Levi covered her hand with his. "I won't let him hurt you, June, or use what happened to Samuel against either of us." "I'm not afraid of James Morrison," June said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "His father already took everything he could. There's nothing left to threaten." "Don't be too sure. Men like that, they find ways to—" "Miss June!" Tom Carter burst through the door. Louise is crying 'cause Emma said she wrote her R backwards and now she won't stop. The crisis of childhood pulled June back to immediate concerns. She squeezed Levi's hand once, a promise that the conversation wasn't over, then returned to her students. The rest of the day passed quietly, but June noticed Levi's increased vigilance. He found reasons to work near the house, and when parents arrived to collect their children, he made a point of greeting each one, reinforcing connections that might matter in the days to come. That evening, after Elena had retired and the house had settled into quiet, June found Levi on the porch despite the cold. She draped a blanket around his shoulders and sat beside him on the bench he'd moved from Margaret's Hill. "You can't protect everyone," she said softly. "I can try." That's what Samuel thought too. The words came out harder than she'd intended, but she pressed on. He thought he could stand between trouble and everyone else. It killed him. Levi was quiet for a long moment. "You think I'm being foolish?" "I think you're being noble. There's a difference, but the end result might be the same." She pulled the blanket tighter around them both. "Talk to me. Really talk. Not about protecting me or the ranch or the water rights. Talk about what you're afraid of." He turned to look at her, and in the lamplight spilling from the window, she saw the fear he'd been masking. "I'm afraid of losing this," he admitted. "Not the ranch stone and wood can be rebuilt, but this life we're making, these mornings with coffee and purpose, evenings where the house feels alive again. You." "Levi." "I know we haven't put words to it, haven't made promises or declarations, but June, these past weeks." He caught her hand, held it like an anchor. "I was dead for 3 years. Now I'm not, and the thought of going back to that darkness—" "You won't," June interrupted fiercely. "No matter what James Morrison does, no matter what the association decides, you won't go back. I won't let you." "How can you be sure?" "Because I need you too much." The admission cost her, but she forced it out. "I need these mornings and evenings. I need someone who understands that you can laugh at breakfast and still honor the dead. I need you, Levi Stone, and I'll be damned if I'll let some spoiled Eastern boy with his father's grudges take that away." He stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "June Lark, I do believe you just cursed." "Sometimes the situation calls for it." She managed a shaky smile. "Besides, Elena says ladies are allowed 1 curse word per year for emergencies." "Is this an emergency?" "It is if you're thinking of facing the Morrisons alone, if you're considering some noble sacrifice to protect the rest of us." She turned to face him fully. "We're partners. Remember in the school. In this life we're building. Partners don't let each other stand alone." "Partners," he repeated, testing the word. Then, with sudden decision, he stood, drawing her up with him. "Come with me." "Where?" "Just come." He led her through the house to his study, a room she'd barely entered since her arrival. It smelled of leather and tobacco, thoroughly masculine, with maps of the territory covering one wall and ledgers neat on the desk. Levi went to a cabinet, withdrawing a document case. "I had these drawn up last week," he said, spreading papers on the desk. "I was waiting for the right moment, but maybe there's no such thing." June leaned over to read, her breath catching as she recognized legal documents. "Levi, what is this?" "Partnership papers. For the school, officially, but also—" He pointed to specific passages. "Joint ownership of the eastern section of the ranch, the part with the best water access, teachers' quarters to be considered private property of Mrs. June Lark, decisions regarding the education program to be made jointly, and in the event of my death or incapacitation—" "Stop." June pressed her fingers to his lips. "Just stop. You need to hear this. If something happens to me, the school continues. The house remains yours. The water rights. Nothing is going to happen to you. June, be practical. Morrison wants—" "I know what he wants, and I know what I want." She moved her hand to cup his cheek. I want a partner, not a martyr. I want morning coffee and evening walks and children learning their letters. I want you alive and arguing with me about the proper way to teach arithmetic. We don't argue about arithmetic. We will. I have very strong opinions about the carrying of numbers. She tried for lightness, but her voice cracked. Don't you dare plan for dying. Levi Stone? We've both done enough of that. He covered her hand with his, leaning into her touch. Then what should I plan for? Living, fighting, if we have to, but together. Building something Morrison and all his lawyers can't tear down because it's not made of paper and legal words. She gestured at the documents. These are fine, practical things, but they're not what makes us partners. What does this? She said, and pulled his head down to hers. The kiss was nothing like the gentle pecks they'd shared. This was declaration and promise, fierce with life and determination. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Well, Levi said roughly, that's a compelling argument. I'm a teacher. I'm good with arguments. June smoothed his shirt where she'd gripped it. Now, about these papers. Yes, I'll sign them, but not because you're planning to die heroically, because partners make things official, because the children deserve to know their school is permanent, because, she took a breath, because I love you and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. The words hung in the air between them, bright and terrifying as a lit fuse. Levi went absolutely still, and for a moment June wondered if she'd ruined everything. Then he moved, lifting her onto the desk with an urgency that scattered carefully organized papers. Say it again. I love you. Easier the second time, like a door once opened couldn't be shut. I love your stubbornness and your nobility and the way you fix fences that don't need fixing just to be near the schoolroom. June. I love how you are with the children, patient and kind. I love that you brought Margaret's recipes to Elena so the kitchen would smell like a home again. I love. He kissed her quiet, a thorough silencing that left her clutching his shoulders for balance. When he pulled back, his gray eyes were bright with something that looked like joy. I love you too, he said simply. Have for weeks. Maybe since that first night when you demanded truth instead of comfort, you brought me back to life. June Lark, I'll be damned if I waste that gift on fear. Good. She slid off the desk, straightening her skirts with hands that trembled only slightly. Then we face whatever comes together. Morrison, the association, the gossips in town who'll have plenty to say about this arrangement. Let them talk. Levi pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. We've survived worse than wagging tongues. They stood there in the lamplight study, holding each other while outside the November wind rattled the windows. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, Morrison's threats, the association's pressure, the endless complexity of water rights and territorial politics. But tonight, they had this love spoken aloud, partnerships sealed with more than paper, and the quiet certainty that whatever storms came, they would weather them together. Not because they had to, but because they chose to, deliberately and with full knowledge of the cost. We should go in, June said eventually. It's late, and the children come early. In a moment, Levi held her tighter. Let me remember this. How it feels to be completely, absolutely unafraid. June understood. In a life marked by loss and careful distances, such moments were rare as desert rain. So they stood together while the lamp burned low. Two people who'd found in each other not just love, but the courage to live fully despite all the reasons not to. When they finally parted, it was with the knowledge that something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer two grieving souls sharing space and careful comfort. They were partners in the truest sense, bound by choice and love and the determination to build something lasting in a world that had already taken too much. The signed papers could wait for morning. Tonight, they had each other, and that was contract enough. The rain returned on a Tuesday evening. 3 weeks after June and Levi had declared their partnership in his study, it wasn't the violent storm of that first night they'd met, but a steady, soaking rain that turned the roads to mud and kept the children home from school. June used the quiet day to reorganize the small library they'd started, while Levi worked on ledgers in his study. Elena hummed in the kitchen, preparing bread for the next day. It was a peaceful domestic scene that should have felt perfect. Should have, except for the letter that had arrived that morning. June found Levi still at his desk as darkness fell. The letter spread before him alongside what looked like legal documents. His shoulders were rigid with tension, and he didn't look up when she entered. "The children will return tomorrow if the rain stops," she said, setting a cup of coffee beside him. Tom Carter sent word that he's been practicing his letters. Good. The word was clipped, distracted. June studied him for a moment, then made a decision. She moved behind his chair, resting her hands on his shoulders. "You've been here all day. Whatever's in that letter won't change for brooding over it." "It's from James Morrison's lawyer." Levi's voice was flat. "He's claiming his father had a verbal agreement with Samuel about the water rights. Says there were witnesses." June's hands stilled. "What witnesses?" "He doesn't say, just that they're prepared to testify that Samuel agreed to limit his water usage in exchange for Morrison's investment in the bridge construction." Levi turned in his chair to face her. "June, did Samuel ever mention anything about Morrison funding the bridge?" "No." She moved to sit on the desk's edge, needing to see his face. "Samuel handled business matters himself, but he would have mentioned something that significant. Would he if he thought it would worry you?" June considered this. Samuel had been protective, sometimes maddeningly so. Perhaps not, but Levi, even if Morrison did contribute to the bridge fund, that wouldn't give him rights to our to Samuel's water. Unless there was an agreement. Levi rubbed his face. "Morrison's boy is also claiming I was negligent in maintaining the bridge, that I knew it was failing and did nothing. That's a lie." "Is it?" The question came out harsh. "I should have checked it more thoroughly. Should have seen—" "Stop!" June caught his hands. "We've been down this road. You checked the bridge that morning. The storm, the weight of 5 men, the fighting any of those could have caused the collapse. Try telling that to a territorial judge." Levi pulled free, standing to pace. "If Morrison can establish negligence, he can claim damages, force me to sell to cover the debt. He's after the ranch." "The ranch, the water rights, everything." Levi stopped at the window, staring out at the rain. "But more than that, I think he's after vindication. His father died believing I'd ruined him. The son wants to finish what Bart started." June rose, moving to stand beside him. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see the dim outline of the schoolroom. "What do we do?" Levi turned to her. "June, this isn't your fight. Morrison's quarrel is with me. I thought we were past this." She kept her voice level despite the hurt. "Partners, remember your fights are mine." "Not this one. If Morrison's looking for leverage, having you here—" He stopped, jaw working. "Having me here what makes you vulnerable?" June felt anger rising. "Should I pack my things, return to town where I can't be used against you?" "I didn't say that." "You're thinking it." She stepped back, needing distance. 3 weeks ago you signed papers making me your partner. Now at the first real test, you want to protect me by pushing me away." "I want to protect you because I love you," Levi said roughly. "Because I already watched one person die because of the Morrisons' greed. I won't watch it happen again. And I won't be sent away like a child who can't handle difficulty." June moved to the desk, picking up the letter. "May I?" Levi nodded reluctantly. She read through the legal language carefully, her teacher's mind parsing each phrase. Something nagged at her, a detail that didn't fit. "Levi, this mentions the bridge construction happening in spring of '72. So, Samuel and I didn't arrive in the valley until fall of '72. We bought the ranch that winter. She set the letter down. If Morrison funded bridge construction in the spring, Samuel couldn't have made any agreement about it. Hope flickered in Levi's eyes. You're certain about the dates? Absolutely. I have our deed, the bill of sale, all dated January 1873. June began pacing, mind-working. What if Morrison is conflating two different things? What if there was an earlier agreement about the bridge, before Samuel arrived, and Morrison's trying to transfer that claim? It's possible. Levi moved to his files, pulling out ledgers. I kept all the territorial records when I was maintaining the crossing. If we can prove the timeline. They worked together for the next hour, spreading documents across the desk, building a chronology that revealed the truth. The original bridge had indeed been partially funded by Bart Morrison, but the agreement had been with the previous landowner, a man named Donnelly, who'd sold to Samuel. Morrison had no claim on Samuel's water, Levi said, leaning back in his chair. He was trying to enforce an agreement with a man who'd left the territory. But he knew Samuel wouldn't know that. A newcomer, unfamiliar with the old agreements. June shook her head. He was trying to swindle him. And when Samuel refused, Morrison got desperate. Levi's expression darkened. Desperate enough to force a confrontation at the crossing. June sank into a chair, the weight of understanding heavy on her shoulders. Samuel died for nothing. A lie built on a lie. No. Levi knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. He died being who he was, a man who wouldn't stand by while another was in danger. Morrison's lies don't change that. But if we can prove this, if we can show that Morrison had no legitimate claim, then his son's case falls apart. Levi squeezed her hands. June, I'm sorry for trying to push you away, for thinking I had to handle this alone. Old habits, she said softly. We both have them. I need to break mine. I need to remember that having a partner means... He stopped as footsteps sounded in the hall. Elena appeared in the doorway, her usually calm face creased with concern. Senor Stone, riders coming, many of them. Levi rose, moving to the window. Through the rain, the glow of torches was visible. Morrison, he's brought friends. Should I get the rifle? Elena asked. No, we'll meet them peacefully. Levi pulled on his coat. June, stay inside. No. She stood, chin lifted. Partners face things together. He looked ready to argue, then nodded. Together, then... They met Morrison's party on the porch. James Morrison was younger than his father had been, with the soft look of a man who'd spent more time in offices than saddles. But his eyes held the same cold calculation. Stone, Mrs. Lark. He touched his hat brim mockingly. Unpleasant evening for a social call, but business won't wait. State your business then, Levi said. I've come to offer you a chance to settle this peacefully. Sign over the water rights, and I'll drop the negligence claim. Morrison's smile was thin. It's more than fair, considering you let my father die. Your father died of fever 2 years after the bridge incident, June said before Levi could respond. If anyone let him die, it was the doctor who couldn't cure him. Morrison's eyes snapped to her. The widow speaks. How touching. Tell me, Mrs. Lark, does Stone pay you for more than teaching services? Levi stepped forward, but June caught his arm. Mr. Morrison, your implications are as baseless as your legal claims. We have documents proving your father's arrangement was with the previous landowner, not my husband. Documents can be forged. So can witness testimony, June replied evenly, especially when those witnesses are being paid. Morrison's face flushed. You're calling me a liar. I'm calling you mistaken, June said. Perhaps grief has clouded your memory. I understand that. Grief can make us see things that aren't there. Create villains where there are only victims. Don't speak to me of grief. Morrison snarled. You've moved on readily enough. Warming Stone's bed. Enough. Levi's voice cut like a blade. You'll keep a civil tongue or leave my property. Your property for now. Morrison gathered his reins. This isn't over. I'll see you in court. Stone, both of you. We'll see how your partnership holds up under oath. He wheeled his horse, his men following. They thundered off into the rain, leaving silence in their wake. Well, June said after a moment, that was educational. Levi turned to her, something like awe in his expression. You were magnificent. I was terrified. She let out a shaky breath. But also furious. How dare he use what we have as a weapon? Because he knows it's our strength, Elena said from the doorway. Men like that, they attack what they fear. Inside, Levi built up the fire while June made fresh coffee. The confrontation had left them all restless, needing the comfort of warmth and light. He'll take this to court, Levi said finally. Let him. June pulled out the documents they'd found. We have truth on our side. Truth doesn't always win in court. No, June agreed. But it doesn't always lose either. She moved to sit beside him on the settee. Levi, I need to tell you something. About Samuel. He tensed. What about him? The night he left for the crossing, we argued. The admission came hard. I wanted him to take men with him. I had a bad feeling. Call it women's intuition, but he laughed it off, said I worried too much. June. I was so angry. Told him he was too trusting, too willing to believe the best of people. Tears she'd held back for 3 years threatened to spill. My last words to him were, your faith in human nature will get you killed someday. Oh, June. Levi gathered her close. I've carried that for 3 years, the guilt of being right, of not fighting harder to make him listen. She pressed her face against his shoulder. But tonight, facing Morrison, I understood something. Samuel knew the risks. He went anyway because that's who he was. Just like you knew I should stay inside but let me stand with you because that's who I am. And who are you? Levi asked softly. Someone who's done letting fear and guilt make decisions. Someone who chooses to fight for what matters. She pulled back to meet his eyes. Someone who loves you and won't be pushed aside when things get difficult? He kissed her then, deep and desperate, a claiming and a promise. When they broke apart, his eyes were fierce with determination. Morrison wants a fight. He'll get one. But June, I need you to know if it goes badly. If we lose, then we lose together, she finished. And we build something new from what's left. That's what partners do. They sat together as the fire crackled and rain drummed on the roof. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, court preparations, worried neighbors, the endless complexities of territorial law. But tonight, they had truth and each other. And for now, that was enough. Elena, passing by with an armload of mending, paused in the doorway. Is good, she said simply. To see you both remember that the living must fight for the living, not just honor the dead. After she left, June leaned into Levi's warmth. She's right. Samuel wouldn't want me to spend my life seeking justice for his death. He'd want me to live, to love, to teach children and argue about water rights and make a life worth having. And Margaret would box my ears for trying to handle this alone, Levi admitted. She always said I was too quick to carry burdens that needed sharing. Wise women, both of them. June traced patterns on his hand. Think they're somewhere watching us stumble toward happiness? I hope so. Levi brought her hand to his lips. I hope they see that their losses weren't wasted on us, that we're choosing life, even when it's complicated and difficult and full of James Morrisons. Outside, the rain began to slacken, and somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called. The sound was hopeful in the darkness, a reminder that storms pass and morning always comes. They would face Morrison in court. They would stand together and speak truth and trust in justice. And regardless of the outcome, They would continue building their life teaching children, sharing morning coffee, choosing love over fear. It was what the living owed the dead, not just remembrance, but the courage to keep living fully, fiercely, and without apology. December brought the first real snow, transforming the valley into a pristine wilderness that made travel difficult, but the world beautiful. The schoolroom stayed warm with the steady heat of the stove and the energy of young minds at work. Word of June and Levi's partnership, both professional and personal, had spread through the valley like wildfire after Morrison's visit. Some families withdrew their children, unwilling to associate with what they saw as impropriety, but more stayed, and new ones came, drawn by June's reputation as a teacher who could reach even the most reluctant learners. The schoolroom, which had started with 15 students, now held 22. It was Martha who brought the news that would change everything. She arrived on a crystalline Tuesday afternoon, her wagon cutting fresh tracks through the snow. June saw her from the schoolroom window and felt a flutter of unease. Martha rarely left her saloon during business hours. "Children, continue copying your verses," June instructed. "Sarah, please help the younger ones." She met Martha on the porch, noting the older woman's grim expression. "What's happened?" "Nothing good." Martha glanced toward the barn where Levi was working. "Morrison's been busy. He's called in notes all over the valley. 3 more families forced to sell. But that's not why I'm here." "Tell me." Martha pulled a folded paper from her coat. "This came to my place, addressed to you. Didn't trust sending it through the regular post." June recognized the handwriting immediately. Her hands shook as she opened the letter. "Dear Mrs. Lark," she read aloud. "I am writing to you at great personal risk. My name is William Hutchins. You may remember me as the man your late husband saved the night the bridge collapsed. I have carried the weight of that night for 3 years, and I can no longer remain silent." June. Levi appeared around the corner, drawn by something in her voice. "What is it?" She handed him the letter wordlessly, watching his face change as he read. "He wants to meet," Levi said finally. "Says he has information about Morrison's plans, information that could change everything." "It could be a trap," Martha warned. "Morrison might be using Hutchins to draw you out. Or it could be a man's conscience finally getting the better of him." June said. She looked at Levi. "We have to go." "We..." "Don't start that again." She softened the words with a touch to his arm. "Hutchins wrote to me, not you. And he's right, I deserve to hear what he has to say about the night my husband died saving him." Levi nodded slowly. "When?" "Tonight, at the old Donnelly place, the ranch Samuel bought." June felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December air. "He says to come alone." But you won't," Martha interrupted. "I'll follow at a distance with Tom Brennan. That boy's turned into a fair shot since his brother left town. If this is a trap, you'll have backup." They made their plans quickly. Elena would stay with the children, extending lessons into the evening to explain June's absence. Levi would accompany June openly, despite Hutchins's request to compromise between safety and the man's apparent need for discretion. As dusk painted the snow purple and gold, June and Levi rode toward the abandoned Donnelly Ranch. The place had stood empty since Samuel's death, a ghost of failed dreams that June had never been able to bring herself to sell. "Are you sure about this?" Levi asked as they neared the property. "No," June admitted. "But I'm tired of not knowing, tired of half-truths and implications. If Hutchins can shed light on that night, I need to hear it." The ranch house loomed dark against the snow, windows blank as dead eyes. But smoke rose from the chimney, and a horse stood tied to the porch rail. "He's here," Levi said unnecessarily. They dismounted, June's hand finding Levi's in the gathering darkness. Together, they climbed the steps to the door that had once been hers. Hutchins answered their knock immediately, as if he'd been waiting just inside. He looked older than June remembered from the trial, worn down by more than years. His hands shook as he gestured them inside. Mrs. Lark Stone, he swallowed hard. Thank you for coming. The interior was sparse, a few pieces of furniture covered in dust sheets. A fire in the hearth providing the only light. Hutchins had clearly been camping here rather than living. You said you had information, June prompted when the silence stretched too long. I do, but first, Hutchins met her eyes with a visible effort. I need to say what I should have said 3 years ago. Your husband was the finest man I ever met, and I helped kill him. The bridge killed him, Levi said, but Hutchins shook his head. The bridge was the instrument. Morrison and I, we were the cause. He sank into a chair, looking far older than his years. I need to tell you the truth. All of it. June sat across from him, Levi standing protective behind her chair. We're listening. Morrison had been working on me for weeks before that night. Said the water rights were strangling his ranch, that Stone here was in Lark's pocket, that the only way to save the valley's economy was to force a redistribution. Hutchins laughed bitterly. Made it sound almost noble, but it was always about the money. We know Morrison wanted the water rights, Levi said. No, you don't understand. Hutchins leaned forward. It wasn't just the water. Morrison had investors back east, had promised them vast returns on cattle operations, but he'd overextended, borrowed against assets he didn't have. If he couldn't deliver the water rights, he'd be ruined. More than ruined, he'd be facing prison for fraud. June felt pieces clicking into place. So he got desperate. Beyond desperate. The night of the meeting, he told me to be ready, said Lark might need persuading and that accidents happened in the dark. Hutchins' voice dropped. I thought he meant to rough him up, maybe. Scare him. I never thought— You drew your gun, June said quietly. Morrison gave the signal. I was supposed to make Lark back down, make him see he had no choice. Tears ran down Hutchins' weathered face. But your husband, he moved so fast, had his iron out before I could think, and the look in his eyes not fear, just disappointment, like he'd expected better of us. Then the bridge collapsed. Levi prompted, No. Hutchins wiped his face. First, Morrison made his real threat. Said if Lark didn't sign over the rights, you'd be next. Mrs. Lark. Said a woman alone on a ranch. Accidents happened all the time. June's blood ran cold. Samuel never told me. He wouldn't have. Soon as Morrison said your name, your husband's whole demeanor changed. He looked Morrison dead in the eye and said, You touch her, and I'll kill you myself, from beyond the grave if necessary. That's when the bridge started to go, Levi said, understanding dawning. The timbers cracked like gunshots. I was on the edge, frozen with fear. Your husband could have made it to safety easy, but he saw me standing there like a fool. Hutchins met June's eyes. He didn't hesitate, grabbed me and threw me clear just as the whole structure gave way. And Morrison, June asked. Watched it happen. When we pulled your husband's body from the river next morning, Morrison was already spinning the story. Said Lark had agreed to negotiate, but the bridge failed. Made himself out to be a grieving neighbor. Hutchins's jaw clenched. But that night, when everyone else was searching the riverbank, I heard him talking to his son. Said at least the problem was solved. That you'd have to sell now, being a widow. But I didn't sell, June said. No, and it ate at Morrison. His investors pulled out. The fraud investigation started closing in. The fever that killed him. Maybe it was real sickness. Maybe it was shame. Or maybe it was the devil collecting what was owed. Hutchins stood, pacing to the window. His son James knows some of this. That's why he's pushing so hard now, trying to complete his father's work, restore the family name. Will you testify to this? Levi asked. In court. Hutchins was quiet for a long moment. Morrison's son has my daughter. What? June rose, alarmed. Not kidnapped, nothing so crude. But she works in his house as a maid, sends money home to her sick mother. He's made it clear that if I speak against him, she'll be dismissed, blacklisted, in these parts. That's as good as a death sentence for a young woman with no other skills. So you're trapped, June said. Unless, Hutchins turned from the window. There's another way. I've kept something all these years. Couldn't bring myself to destroy it. Couldn't bring myself to use it. He moved to the fireplace, reaching behind a loose stone. The night he died, Morrison gave me this for safekeeping. Said if anything happened to him, I was to burn it. He pulled out an oilskin packet, handling it like it might bite. I think he knew he was dying. Maybe wanted to confess, but couldn't bring himself to speak it. So he gave me his burden instead. With shaking hands, he opened the packet, revealing documents covered in Morrison's handwriting. June and Levi leaned in to read. Dear God, Levi breathed. It's all here. The forged agreements, the threats, the plan to force Samuel's hand. He documented everything. His insurance policy, Hutchins said, or maybe his confession. Either way, it's proof that the water rights claim is fraudulent, that the negligence charge is a lie. This changes everything, June said, but Hutchins was already shaking his head. I can't give this to you. My daughter... We'll protect her. June interrupted. Bring her here. Give her work at the school. I need an assistant with the growing number of students. You'd do that after what I... You made a terrible mistake, June said firmly. But Samuel gave his life believing you deserved a second chance. I won't dishonor that by refusing to offer what he died providing. Hutchins broke down completely then, sobbing like a man releasing years of poison. June let him cry, understanding too well the weight of carried guilt. When he finally composed himself, his face showed something like peace. I'll need a week to get my daughter safely away. Then I'll bring these documents to the territorial judge myself, testify to everything. You're sure? Levi asked. I've been dead inside for 3 years. Stone, time I started living again, even if it costs me. He handed the packet to June. Keep these safe. They're your husband's justice. 3 years delayed. They left him there in the empty house with his ghosts and his newfound resolve. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and stars emerged like scattered diamonds on black velvet. It's over, June said wonderingly as they rode home. Or nearly so. Morrison can't stand against this evidence. You were magnificent in there, Levi said, offering to help his daughter, appealing to his conscience. Samuel would have done the same. She looked up at the stars. Do you think he knows that his death wasn't completely meaningless? I think, Levi said carefully. That meaning comes from what we do with the chances we're given. Your Samuel gave Hutchins a second chance. Now Hutchins is passing that forward. That's not meaningless. They were nearly home when they met Martha and Tom coming the other way. June quickly filled them in on what had transpired. I'll put word out, Martha said. Make sure Hutchins and his daughter have protection. Morrison won't take this quietly. Let him rage, June said with newfound steel in her voice. We have truth and law on our side now. Back at the ranch, Elena met them with hot coffee and knowing eyes. Is good news. Yes, I see it in your faces. Justice, June said. Finally. That night, after the house had settled and the documents were locked safely away, June found herself on Margaret's bench despite the cold. Levi joined her, wrapping them both in a heavy blanket. How do you feel? He asked. Free, June said after consideration. For 3 years I've carried questions. Blamed myself for not stopping Samuel from going that night. Now I know nothing I could have said would have mattered. Morrison had backed him into a corner. He chose you, Levi said softly. When Morrison threatened you, Samuel chose your safety over his own life. And I choose us, June replied, turning in his arms. Our life, our school, our future. Morrison's son can rage all he wants. We're not running. No, Levi agreed, pulling her close. We're not. They sat together under the vast winter sky. Two people who'd found love in the ashes of loss. In a week, Hutchins would deliver his testimony. Morrison would fail. The school would continue to grow. But tonight, they simply held each other and watched the stars, knowing that sometimes justice comes slowly but surely, carried on the conscience of flawed men trying to make things right. In the house behind them, warm light spilled from windows where children would gather tomorrow to learn their letters and numbers. It was a small thing, maybe in the vast scheme of territorial struggles and water rights. But it was theirs, built on truth and partnership, and the radical belief that life was meant to be lived fully, even after loss. Especially after loss. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing the first green shoots by late March. The territorial court had ruled decisively in their favor after Hutchins' testimony. And James Morrison had left the valley in disgrace, his father's empire in ruins. The water rights remained as they should, shared fairly among neighbors who understood that survival meant cooperation. June stood in the doorway of the schoolroom, watching her students work on their compositions. 25 children now filled the benches, with more families inquiring each week. Sarah Carter, her star pupil, helped the younger ones while Tom worked through advanced arithmetic that would serve him well when he took over his father's ranch. A movement in the yard caught her eye. Levi was positioning a chair, the same ladder-back chair from that first night at Martha's saloon, on the newly built porch that wrapped around the schoolroom. He'd been doing small things like this for weeks now, creating spaces for quiet moments, for conversations that didn't need words. Miss June, little Louise Carter tugged at her skirt. "I finished my letters. Can I show Mr. Stone?" "Of course. Dear, I'm sure he'd love to see." The child scampered out, braids bouncing, and June watched as Levi crouched down to examine the slate with grave attention. The sight never failed to move her, this man who'd lost so much learning to be gentle again, to find joy in small victories. "He's good with them," Elena observed, joining June in the doorway. "Patient, kind, will make a good father someday." June felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Elena, what is truth? You two dance around each other like teenagers at a church social. Everyone sees but you." "We're not dancing around anything. We're partners. We're living in the same house but separate rooms, sharing coffee and meals and looks that could melt snow, but nothing more." Elena shook her head. "Life is short, Mija. The dead don't need such careful honor." Before June could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. William Hutchins rode up, his daughter Mary beside him. They'd been regular visitors since the trial. Hutchins finding redemption in helping maintain the school, while Mary had indeed become June's invaluable assistant. Mrs. Lark. Hutchins dismounted, helping his daughter down. "Letter came for you at the post office. Thought it might be important." June accepted the envelope, recognizing the official seal of the Territorial Education Board. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. "What is it?" Levi had approached, Louise still chattering about her letters. "They're recognizing us," June breathed. "The ranch school, official certification, funding for supplies, even a small salary supplement." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "We did it. We're a real school." The children, sensing excitement, crowded around. June read parts of the letter aloud, their cheers echoing across the valley when she reached the part about new books and maps coming from the territorial capital. "We should celebrate," Mary Hutchins suggested. "A proper gathering. Invite all the families. Show them what their children have accomplished." "A school exhibition," June agreed. Mind already planning. The children could recite, demonstrate their arithmetic, display their best penmanship. "I can make refreshments," Elena offered. "I'll set up tables and benches in the yard," Levi added. The excitement was infectious, and soon everyone was contributing ideas. It wasn't until the afternoon lessons ended and the children dispersed that June found herself alone with Levi again. They walked toward the river, following a path that had become familiar over the months. The new bridge stood strong in the background, but it was just scenery now, no longer a monument to tragedy. "You're quiet," June observed. "Thinking." Levi picked up a stone, skipping it across the water. "About changes, about time passing, about things that need saying." "Such as?" He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "June, we've been partners for months now. Built something good together, the school, the ranch, this life. But I'm tired of being careful." "Levi, let me finish, please." He took her hands, his own steady despite the emotion in his voice. "When you first came to Cedar Hollow, you said you just wanted to talk. I pulled that chair closer and asked how close you meant. Do you remember?" "Every word," June whispered. "I'm asking again, how close?" "June, because I want all of it, not just partnership and shared purpose. I want morning coffee that leads to kisses. I want to sit on that porch and know you're mine and I'm yours in all the ways that matter." He squeezed her hands. "I want to marry you, if you'll have me." June felt tears prick her eyes. What would people say, the widow Lark and the man who was there when... "I don't give a damn what people say." The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. "We've paid our dues to the past. June, Samuel's gone. Margaret's gone. They're not coming back. And I don't think they'd want us to spend our lives as monuments to their memory." "No," June agreed softly. "They wouldn't." "Then what's stopping us? What are we waiting for?" June looked at their joined hands, at the silver thread of river behind them, at this man who'd become everything. "Fear, I suppose. Fear that happiness built on such sorrow can't last." "Maybe it can't," Levi admitted. "Maybe we get a year or 10 or 50 before something else breaks our hearts. But June, I'd rather have whatever time we're given together than a lifetime of careful distance." She thought of Elena's words, of life being short and the dead not needing such careful honor. She thought of her students, learning to write their names and imagine futures. She thought of Samuel, who'd chosen her safety over his own life, and Margaret, whose bench had become a place of new beginnings. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to morning kisses and evening walks and building a life that honors the past by embracing the future." She freed one hand to touch his face. Yes to being close enough. Close. He kissed her then, there by the river that had taken so much and given them each other. It was different from their careful previous kisses. This was declaration and promise. Joy and release. The final letting go of ghosts. When they broke apart, both were laughing through tears. "When?" Levi asked. "After the school exhibition, let the children have their day first. Then we'll have ours." June leaned into him. "A small wedding. Just family, our ranch family. Martha can stand with me, and Tom Brennan with you. Elena will insist on cooking. The children will want to attend. Of course, it wouldn't be our wedding without them." They walked back to the house hand in hand, no longer careful about who might see. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that seemed to bless their decision. On the newly built porch, the chair sat waiting. Levi pulled it out, gesturing for June to sit. Then he drew up another beside it close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough that words were optional. "I came here to talk," June said, echoing that long-ago night. "Seems I'm staying for more than conversation." "Seems you are," Levi agreed, taking her hand. They sat together as stars began to appear. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the greatest honor you can give the dead is to live fully, love freely, and build something worthy from the ashes of loss. Inside the house, Elena began preparations for dinner, humming a tune that sounded like celebration. From the schoolroom came Mary Hutchins's voice as she organized supplies for tomorrow's lessons. The ordinary sounds of life continuing, of purpose and place, and people choosing to create family from shared hopes. "No more ghosts," June said softly. "No more ghosts," Levi agreed. "Just us, building tomorrow." The chair beneath them creaked slightly. A comfortable sound of weight shared and boundaries dissolved. In the distance, a nightingale began its evening song, and June thought she'd never heard anything more beautiful than this moment, sitting close enough to touch, close enough to trust, close enough to stop measuring distance and simply be. 2 weeks later, after the children had recited their poems and demonstrated their sums to proud parents, after the community had gathered to celebrate what June and Levi had built, they stood before Reverend Douglas in that same schoolroom and promised to face whatever came together. June wore her mother's wedding dress, altered by Elena's careful hands. Levi stood tall in his best suit, looking at her like she was his whole world. The children sat in the front row, beaming as if they'd arranged this match themselves. When Reverend Douglas pronounced them husband and wife, when Levi kissed her with tender reverence while their makeshift family cheered, June knew that every step of the journey had led to this. Every loss, every careful conversation, every moment of choosing life over mere existence. Later, as the sun set on their wedding day, June and Levi sat on their porch now, truly and completely. The chair that had started it all was joined by its mate, close enough for comfort, far enough for individuality. "How close?" Levi asked one more time, smiling at their private joke. "This close," June answered, closing the last of the distance between them. "Exactly this close. Forever." And in the settling dusk of a frontier spring, with their students' artwork decorating the walls and their friends' laughter echoing from the house, two people who'd thought their best days were behind them discovered that sometimes the finest chapters are the ones you write after the story seems over. Sometimes you just need someone to pull up a chair and ask the right questions. Sometimes talking leads to building, and building leads to love, and love leads to a life worth every careful step it took to find it. Just close enough to matter, just close enough to last. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. If you enjoyed this journey through the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of love, loss, and redemption in the American frontier. Your support means the world and helps keep these tales alive. Until next time, partners.